So it's like, you got to fake it till you make it. How do you make it feel bigger than what it is?
Yeah.
And how do you trick the Americans into thinking it's not knowing how weird the Quebec market is? How do you trick the Americans into thinking that it's number one in the country, so like everybody likes it?
I would say that there was almost like a different time, a bit of a changing of the guard where independent acts were doing it by themselves, right?
Yeah.
So maybe the weight of being at a label didn't have as much pull as it did before. So was that some of the challenges that you'd run into when you were some of those things where you say like, oh, they didn't want to talk to us?
No, I think we were just at the cusp of that. Like we were just I think we were just there when I think people were still really relying on majors when we were just there.
Okay.
And we had it was the beginning of Spotify. Like I remember when Nate Wozniak did his first meeting at Universal and we all sat in the room and he like explained Spotify to us, you know, like it was like which is crazy when you think about it now.
I know. Took me forever to understand it.
Yeah. And the shift hadn't happened just yet, but it was starting. Like it was like,
something was different.
Something was different. It was still, our biggest issue was always that the acts were signing to the US and not to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, we weren't competing with the independents. We were competing with the US.
Yes.
Whereas like, I think now the majors compete with the independents more than markets.
Globally.
You know? Yeah, globally. Yeah, exactly.
How long were you at Universal Canada for?
Only 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
What made you step away?
I think I realized, especially in Canada, there's a real lack of infrastructure.
You don't say.
Like, we have, I just like, there is so many incredible talent.
Yeah.
Like, incredibly talented artists.
Yep.
And there were so many people and they had no guidance.
Yep.
And it's just like, by the time they were, like 26, they're like, I should probably write a chorus. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you should have done that at 18, but they don't know. They're just like, they had no guidance. They didn't know how to move forward. And it was just a little bit of the blind leading the blind.
Well, and why do you think that is here in Canada, that happens?
I just don't think there's enough money in the market for there to be a robust enough infrastructure.
Okay.
And I think that Factor saves us. You know what I mean? Like, I think Factor upholds the infrastructure of our country because it provides people the ability to continue moving forward.
Yep.
And so, I just think that like we just don't have the money like the Americans do.
That's true. I mean, it's a tenth of the population as well.
We're just a little tiny little thing, you know?
Yeah. People.
We're California.
Massive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our population is same population as California.
I know, but it takes like 7 days to drive across.
Exactly. I mean, even that in itself, the infrastructure of that, just the tour through Canada is like, it's impossible.
It's super expensive.
Incredibly expensive because you can't just go. It's not stop.
Well, they do it, but then everybody's like, they do it once and they never want to do it again.
Don't want to do it ever again. But you got to build it. You know what I mean? You have to go. You got to go to the provinces. You got to go to the city.
Make sure
build that touring ticket. I want to take a quick break in the pod right now and talk to you guys about something I think could be of importance to you. If you're listening to this pod and thinking, I could really use some personal guidance right now, and you're serious about building your career in the music business, I'm now offering one-on-one private strategy sessions. These are fully personalized, just you and me tackling whatever you need in your music career. Listen, this is the part where you might be thinking to yourself, who the heck is this guy? Well, I got over 17 years of experience in the music business, whether it was working as a manager with artists like Jessie Reyes or working with major record labels like Island, Republic, Universal Music Group, or Sony, or producing content for high-profile artists like The Weeknd and Eminem, to producing content for elite brands like the NBA and Nike. I can definitely and confidently say I can help you map out your next moves. Whether you want to talk about structuring your team, navigating the industry, scaling your brand, or just simply learning how to make money in this music business, whatever's most relevant to where you're at, let's talk. You can now book for a fee a one-on-one session with me, an artist manager and a podcast host, to help you figure out your next steps. Find the link in the description below to book a one-on-one consultation session. Also, big shout out to those who watch this podcast. Bringing value to an audience who seeks it is a blessing. I can't thank you enough for tuning in. I appreciate you. Now let's get back to the pod.
Yeah.
So you realize that there's no lack of infrastructure. There's a lot of artists over here, and then
Yeah.
you start to think. I'm assuming that it's like, well, maybe I can do management. Or,
Yeah. So it was like I couldn't get anything signed. You know what I mean? Like the things that I wanted to sign at the time. I mean, I also like when you look back, I was like just like a very enthusiastic 24-year-old. You know, like I just it was hard to sign people because everybody like they have one meeting and you'd get one email from an intern at Interscope and everybody be like, sorry, Laurie, we're speaking to Interscope, and it'd be like an intern. So like
the intern is sending the email to somebody that's working at Universal Music Canada, and it's nothing you can do about it because the artist is going to be like, yeah, I'm going that way.
I'm going that way.
No, I'll be completely honest with you. I even though we took the meeting over at Universal Music Canada, in the back of my mind, I said, we can never sign to Universal Music Canada because of the red tape.
X, Y, and Z, yeah.
X, Y, and Z, which I've described in the podcast here before. But ultimately, I just said, listen, if we want to be an international act, we have to think globally in the U.S. But in and around that time was that time where you're seeing Chance the Rapper blowing up independently, and we have a relationship with Pat Corcoran at the time. He's schooling us to a lot of this stuff. So now we're building everything that we can, these assets behind the scenes, and then we put our figures, and the world opens up like that. So it's everyone calling, from Tom March to Darkest to the David Masseys of the world in the US and the Sonys and the Stringers. So it's at that point it's like we're gonna go that way. But I just never thought that it made any sense to do a deal in Canada, and also partly because I worked at Mad Rock Entertainment, which was like a production company, and I got to see like the unfortunate side of it was, working with artists who were signed to the major label. And this isn't a knock on Universal Music Canada or Sony or any of them in Canada, but it's just the truth. At the time, we were doing music videos, and we had to rely on the grants, which was much fact at the time. If an artist that was signed to a label didn't get the grant, I, in my mind, being young as well, I'm thinking like, no, it's all good. They're signed to a label. Yeah. Go back to the label. Sorry, Rich. This is because I remember having a specific conversation with Rich.
We got 5K. We got 5K.
I said, we didn't get the grant, but we're going to do the video. And Rich is like, oh, got it, man. I'm sorry. I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah. I'm like, what do you mean? You're at the major label. He's like, it's not going to happen. Yeah. And in that moment, I was like, what is happening? What do you mean the major label doesn't have the money to shoot a music video? That's so necessary, especially in that time, right? So that was where I was also informed of like,
and it's fair, and I think part of the reason that I wanted to leave was seeing people like Jesse blow up, or like, even like Alan Raymond was doing super good, right, there was a bunch of, with Logan, like they were kind of on rolling, and I was Daniel Caesar, exactly. And those were all independent. And then all of a sudden I was like, I can do it. I was like, oh shit, like I can do that. And, at the time, I was kind of like developing artists on the side, like dipping my toes, and like they didn't have managers, so I stepped into that role, and I started talking to Charlotte Cardin and Jason Brando. Yeah. And I remember the first meeting I had with Jason, we had lunch, and I'd never met him. I like literally came with my little suitcase, and it was like a 2-hour lunch where like, when you meet someone and you're like, oh my God, like this is it, like we. And
you're still at the label at the time?
I was still at the label, like we're going in deep. Like we're talking about strategy. We're talking about this. We're talking about that. He'd like never, he had just started his record label. He was like sleeping on his friend's couch. And he's like telling me about Charlotte. He's like, we signed this girl who did La Voix. She is like the voice of an angel. She's super cool, super creative. And like, I got along with him so well. And so I kept on going back to Montreal. And then at one point they were like, you got to quit. They're like, you got to quit and you got to join us. And they're the ones who kind of pushed me over the edge to quit my job and start managing.
Wow. And how long were you with them for?
5 years.
That's okay. 5 years. Yeah. Cause I remember when we were at a Soho House, I think you and I chatted, and at that moment you told me you were no longer at UMC, and then you were with Charlotte Cardin, and she was relatively new at that time.
She's brand new. She had like one song. She released the song Dirty Dirty, which was, it was Big Boy first and then Dirty Dirty. And that was a really fun project to develop, especially at the beginning, because at the time, Quebec media was really, really strong. Okay. And so if you did Quebec TV, you would just like go number one on the iTunes charts. And she had this really big Quebec fan base from playing La Voix.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, how do we build the story? What's our story? How do we break her out of Quebec? Because it was just like unheard of at the time, other than like Celine Dion.
Right.
And the strategy that we took behind that is like, it was also the time of Hype Machine. And so things that were blowing up on Hype Machine, you go to number one on Hype Machine, people would like email you, you know, like all the A&Rs would come running the moment you could kind of play with the algorithm a little bit.
Okay.
And so what we did is like, we got our publicist to like obviously target the Hype Machine blogs. And then she went on TV and she said, you know, if you like my music, like go like it on Hype Machine. I kid you not, on like Quebec TV. Blows up, goes to
So
number
smart.
one. Yeah. On Hype Machine. But then
Is that something coordinated amongst you guys? You're saying, hey, just remember at the end of the thing.
Yeah, but just like, okay, this is our strategy. We want people to vote on Hype Machine. And like she's a pro, you know, like even at 20, she was like, you know, in French, like, thank you everyone, please go on Hype Machine to like it. But not only that is that the single goes number one on iTunes. So when the Americans come running, we didn't explain Quebec. We said number one on iTunes. We went number one on Hype Machine and went number one on iTunes. And we hid the fact that the market was like this like weird microculture, and we made it feel like it was number one in Canada.
But it was number one. But it was really number one in Quebec.
Yeah, it was number one in Canada, but it was because people in Quebec would buy it.
Okay.
So like because the media was so strong there.
Yeah.
They were such fans of her from like literally day one. They would buy the single on iTunes and it would shoot up the charts.
So in essence, it's a bit of a finesse. But now let me ask this though.
Yeah.
Because all of us from Canada kind of have to do that a little bit, you know, a little bit of that dance, right?
Yeah.
Why is it that you had to do that?
I never thought about the why. It was the why was just like, how do we build the story?
Okay.
How do you build the story
to make it feel more
global,
okay.
Especially someone from Quebec, especially someone that you had to get out of this concept of like a Quebec artist, because even the majors didn't really sign
Quebec artists,
Quebecois, you know, and that's why there's such a robust industry in Quebec. Is like they have these amazing indie labels that have just been running forever, but you know, the goal for Charlotte, like Jason and Charlotte, had the ambitions to be international. They didn't want to be a part of that. So it's like, you got to fake it till you make it. How do you make it feel bigger than what it is?
Yeah.
And how do you trick the Americans into thinking it's not knowing how weird the Quebec market is? How do you trick the Americans into thinking that it's number one in the country? So like everybody likes it. Meanwhile, people in the majors, they're like, it's just Quebec. Everything goes to number one in Quebec. But the Americans, they don't know that. And all they see is this like, this like angelic woman with the voice of Amy Winehouse, you know, like, and she was like, she had it all. So it was kind of like it was our hack, you know, it was our trick to the top.
It's so funny because like, yeah, you would think, oh, Canada, there's so many different ways to look at Canada. Cause I mean, to your point where you said Quebec, you kind of, it's in this own place over here, you know, maybe to the side, and they're doing their own thing and it's robust and it's great, but it's very localized. But like to the majors at that time, if you're saying you're from Toronto and you're making some noise in the US, they're from Toronto, we got to go and take that meeting.
Yeah.
Because everything in that moment at that time, 20, you know, after Drake, essentially, it's just like, especially in that urban world or in that pop world, Jesse's from Toronto. Oh, what's in the water in Toronto? Daniel's from Toronto.
Yeah, everybody's like, what's in the water in Toronto?
Yeah. That was a common theme.